Hey, you guys. Good morning. So today we are going to continue on with our narrative unit. So we have taken care of what actually is narrative writing, and then the last time we talked about brainstorming for a narrative writing piece and how that's very different than brainstorming for some of the other pieces that we've worked on in my class so far. Okay, so what I am hoping that this pulls up, thinking. Okay, so I hope that you guys had a good time at least brainstorming for some of those ideas, and that as we go forward, you're ready to kind of tackle the next piece. The next piece that I want to talk about today is, oh good, it's up, is the story arc. Okay, now this is something we've talked about a couple of times throughout the year, and I know you've seen this before. Oh, maybe. There we go. Okay, so the story. Okay, I'm gonna move my face a little bit so that you can see this in its entirety. So I want you guys seen this before. We start like down at the bottom with the exposition, and then we have that rising action, climax, the falling action, and then the resolution. So let's kind of go through this with something that we've all read together, and kind of talk about those different pieces so that you guys don't have questions going forward as we start creating our own story arc. Okay, so let's look at the exposition. So exposition is just a really fancy way of saying the beginning. Okay, so this is the beginning of your narrative. It includes like you're introducing your characters, you're describing where it's taking place, right? And you're talking about kind of essentially like it's giving it all the beginning pieces, right? So when we read Fish in a Tree, the exposition piece is where we meet Allie, right? And we find out that a lot of this is taking place at school, and we start meeting some of those classmates. We meet her mom. We find out, she's struggled in school, like for a long, long time. And she's kind of a smart aleck, and she uses that humor to kind of try and hide the fact that she struggles a lot in school. So that's that exposition piece. Okay. And then we start to see it rise, right? And so that's why we call it the rising action. So this is where like the suspense starts to build, whatever that problem was we had. I know we talked about that in the last video. That a lot of narratives, you have a person, you have a place, and you have a problem, right? Those three P's. And so this is where we're introduced a little bit more. We start to understand more about that problem that was at first that we got that glimpse of. And so things start to become a little bit more muddled. They start getting a little bit more complicated. And there's lots of, usually this is like the biggest part of the book. And will take you to all the way to that climax. So again, let's use Fish in a Tree as our example. So the rising action, this here is where we're starting to see more of the problems that Allie has in school. We're starting to see more of that relationship with Shay and why it's such an issue. We're starting to hear more of her conversations with Mr. Daniels and kind of what he's trying to help her with different things, and then we start to see more of her relationship start to develop with Keisha and Albert and some of the other kids in class. And it's really starting to come to this like almost like where it's bubbling over, and she's so frustrated and she's got these headaches and just nothing is working out the way that she wants until finally we hit the climax of the story. Okay, this is usually the turning point if you guys look up there on the slide. And it's typically the most exciting part. Now, Fish in a Tree was not like a giant, where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't put this down. It was just one of those stories where, man, what's going to happen next? So that's what we're talking about with the climax here. So where Allie is struggling, struggling, struggling. It's just, she feels like it has like gotten to a breaking point. And then they go to the Noah Webster house, right? On that field trip. And Shay, again, is just on her case and makes her feel terrible and calls her a dunce and, the little drawing with the chalkboard. And she finally runs out. And it's Mr. Daniels that finds her and is talking with her. And he says, Allie, I think like, the problem that you've had all these years, it's not that you're dumb, it's that you have dyslexia. And so that's that turning story. All of that rising action, all of those pieces of the story are coming into one piece, climax where, oh my gosh, this is all making sense. Like, this is why she's struggled so much. It's not that she's dumb, it's that she learns differently. Okay. So that's that climax. Okay. That's that top of that triangle. And then looking down, you have that falling action. So the falling action is talking about events that happen after the climax and they lead to the resolution or the end of the story. So we're not at the end yet. Okay. So if we're going to look, we're just going to keep using fish in history because okay. And so that falling action, this is going to be where Allie now stays after school. And she is working on those lessons with Mr. Daniels, and she's finally starting to see some progress. Like, she doesn't have the headaches as bad as she had, at the beginning of the story. And we're starting to see how those relationships within the class have changed now that her classmates understand why she thinks a little bit differently. Um, we're starting to see, like, her brother has, some questions, and there's like another, at least in Fish and Tree, there's like another little dip where we have that, the class presidency, um, election. That was a hard word for me. Where they have the election, and there's another little exciting piece, and she, because those relationships have changed with her classmates, she actually is voted in as president, and so that's all part of that falling action. And then we come to the resolution of the story, which again is just a really fancy way of saying the end, right? So it's how the story is finishing. It's how things end up for the characters. So we see that Allie is in a really good place at the end of the story. Even her brother comes to her and says, like, I'm glad things are working out for you. And Allie all of a sudden has this light bulb moment where she's like, he could help Travis too. So, she introduces Travis to Mr. Daniels and kind of gets that conversation going to maybe help her brother out as well. Okay. So that's the story arc. And that's kind of, we saw that with like a whole novel, how that all comes together. So what you guys are going to do is you're going to take that personal narrative, whatever it was you chose for assignment number 7, right? We created the brainstorm page, and you had to choose which one you wanted to continue with. Okay. So what you're going to do is you are actually going to put yours to story arc, very much like one, except yours is blank. Okay. So this is what will be uploaded for you guys into Google Classroom. And again, you can print this off if you have access to a printer. If you don't, guys, just put it on a piece of paper. Okay. You can kind of see how that we have that little triangle there. I've got a couple boxes, a few lines to help you as you go with this. You'll notice that there is a box up at the top that says point of view. You're just going to leave that blank for right now because that is a box for another lesson. We're not doing that right now. Okay, but this is assignment number 8. Okay, so you'll need to create your own story arc. And you have Thursday and Friday to get this done. It's due on Friday. So if you need to kind of think about how your story, how it all lines out, then that's just fine. Okay. Just make sure that you get it into me on Friday. Okay. So you can see that there is a spot for your exposition. So that's the spot where you're going to start your story. This is who are the characters? Who are the people that were there? Where were you at? Why were you there? What is kind of what was going on? Because we want to make sure that we're answering questions that we think our reader might have. So since I was not there when all of these things happened to you guys, you need to set that up so that I don't have a whole lot of questions when I get all the way to the end. Okay. So make sure that you're answering those kinds of things as we go. You'll have a chance to kind of fill in that rising action. So you're starting to put in, and the nice thing, I'll also put for you this, oops, where is it? I'll also put this in under classroom resources, or actually I might put it with the assignment as well so that you have access to, oh yeah, what was that again? What were we talking about? So you can go back in, and if you're like, what was the rising action? Oh yeah, this is the suspense that builds as the problem becomes more complicated. Oh yeah, now I remember, right? So you can come back to your own story arc, and you can start following that. There's here for your climax and rising action, and then a piece here for your resolution. I will show you guys. I created one for my personal narrative. Uh, and you can see that I left this part as point of view blank because we're going to deal with that um, another time. Okay, but I decided, if you guys remember from the last video, I decided to tell you guys about when I was a little girl, like little, I was like 4, 5, okay, and I lived in, so right down here, you can see that this is kind of where this is starting. I lived in a tiny house that had a nice backyard. It was great. It was fine. We had, a swing set that was there that had been there from the people that lived there before, but it was kind of a dinky playground. The good one was down the street at the elementary school. They had this slide that was huge, and I loved going on the slide. But problem was, I had to walk past this house on the corner where this like ferocious, like seriously guys, ferocious dog lived. I His name was Satan, so that was telling, right? And he scared the living daylights out of me, and I absolutely hated that I had to walk past this house to get to the elementary school. So that's that exposition, right? That's the beginning of it. And so I'm going to tell you guys about a time when I went. And so if you look on that rising action, my dad promised that we'd go after work. I was super nervous. There was the sign that was glinting in the sun. I could see it. We were coming up on it. You could hear the sound of the chain because, like, even though there was a fence, like the dog could like get over the fence. So it had to be chained. I mean, this thing was terrifying, right? He still had to be chained up. And I remember my dad telling me, like, don't run. It makes it worse. I remember thinking, you're crazy because I'm gonna run away from things that are chasing me. Anyway, so the climax here is like where the dog, he charges the fence, like spit's going everywhere. He's snapping, he's snarling, and like he tries to climb over the fence. And I raced the last couple of yards, and I did. I finally made it over there, got to play on the slide. It was awesome. It was so great. But always in the back of my mind, there was always that nagging knowledge that I was going to have to go back home to get past the dog again. So this is, you can kind of see this. I did the same thing. This was a tiny story. This is clearly not a great big novel like Fish in a Tree, or Ivan. If you guys are keeping up on Ivan, you could do that with this story arc as well, reaching that, where he's talking all about his uh, different pieces of his story as he tries to help Ruby. So it's just a tiny story. It's just one event. It's one memory that I have that I'm going to run with. So take a chance. Grab your pencil. Grab a piece of paper. Like I said, you can print this off if you have access to a printer. If not, you are fabulous artists. I'm sure you can handle a triangle. Okay. So I look forward to seeing how you guys are doing on this. When you finish it, snap a picture of it and just upload it in the classroom. Okay. All right, you guys. Until next time. We'll see you later.